You don't get to inspect peace just because it makes you uncomfortable. That was the thought running through my head as Karen, HOA president, self appointed forest warden, and chronic overstepper, stood at the bottom of my gravel driveway screaming about a mandatory inspection. Her voice echoed off the trees like a malfunctioning alarm. She was flanked by two HOA volunteers who looked like they'd been promised donuts and instead walked into a hostage situation. My name is Miles Harper. I'm an engineer by trade, an introvert by design. I enjoy cold brew, Scandinavian crime novels, and the kind of quiet you can hear your thoughts in. I built my cabin myself on the wooded edge of Foxglove Summit, a so-called rustic community where the trees mind their business, but the HOA absolutely does not. I paid my dues. I waved politely. I kept to myself. Apparently, that was suspicious. Karen had recently become obsessed with cabin inspections. She called it the Quarterly Rustic Compliance Initiative, which sounded official until you noticed her bylaws were printed in color and laminated like a diner menu. When she cited Section 12-4, I gently reminded her that section was about pool chlorine levels. Her eye twitched. From there, things escalated quickly. Binocular observations, emails asking if I was harboring mold, a surprise visit with a thermometer, a nighttime flashlight incident she claimed was about carbon monoxide vibes. I tolerated all of it, right up until the morning Karen returned with bolt cutters. That's when my wife Lena stepped onto the porch, calm as snowfall, flashed a badge, and asked one quiet question that sucked all the air out of the forest. Karen, do you have a warrant? Karen laughed. That was her first mistake. Karen did not appreciate being asked for a warrant. In fact, she seemed to take it as a personal challenge. 2 days later, she returned, this time with backup. A man named Paul who apologized every time he spoke, and a woman with a clipboard who looked like she was actively reconsidering every life choice that led her here. Miles, Karen announced, tapping her clipboard like a gavel, we've received multiple complaints. I was on my deck, replacing a loose board, the same board she'd complained about last spring for being too wooden. What kind of complaints? I asked. Paul cleared his throat. Unusual sounds. Unusual how? Karen jumped in. Hammering at odd hours. Foreign music, possible illegal construction. The hammering was me fixing the deck they were standing on. The music was Norwegian folk songs played at whisper level. The illegal construction turned out to be a bird feeder. Karen began photographing my cabin like it was a crime scene. Is this structure permitted? Yes, I said. You saw the permits last year. She ignored me. And this composting toilet, are we sure it meets standards? It passed 3 inspections. She made a note anyway. Karen loved notes. Notes made her feel powerful. Then came the neighborhood tour. Karen started knocking on doors, asking about suspicious smells and possible fire hazards. One neighbor reported her sniffing the air like a bloodhound with a clipboard. The final straw came at night. I looked up from my book to see a flashlight slicing through my curtains. Karen, on my porch, holding a device that looked suspiciously like a TV remote. Oh, I was just checking for carbon monoxide, she said. At 9:30 p.m. the next morning, her adult son appeared at my property line with binoculars. Apparently, bird feeders were now a federal level threat, and somewhere inside the house, my wife Lena quietly started pulling files. Karen escalated the way only someone unfamiliar with consequences can. The following week, she arrived with a small invasion force. Paul, clipboard woman, 2 strangers in matching vests, and, most alarming of all, bolt cutters. We need immediate access, Karen declared. Mandatory safety inspection. That's when my wife Lena stepped forward. Lena doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't posture. She simply asked, Ma'am, do you have a warrant? Karen laughed. Again, this is HOA jurisdiction. I don't need a warrant. Lena nodded, went inside, and came back with a thin manila folder she'd been holding onto for months. You're right, she said gently, but you do. Karen's face drained as Lena opened the folder, because there it was, Karen's name, an active federal warrant. Turns out, Karen hadn't just been abusing HOA power. 3 years earlier, she'd used her HOA title to impersonate a county official, complete with fake seals, letterhead, and emails approving licenses she had no authority to touch. She even charged people for it. Lena, who works with federal task forces, had noticed the pattern months ago. Quietly, patiently, she submitted everything, and this week, the warrant went live. Karen tried everything. Denial, outrage, victimhood. This is harassment. I was helping the community. I demand real authorities. Lena smiled. I am the real authority. When the sheriff arrived, Karen's volunteers slowly backed away like they'd just realized the ship was sinking. Karen was handcuffed at the bottom of my driveway, still shouting about compost toilets and constitutional violations. I sipped my coffee. Justice pairs nicely with cold brew. If you're enjoying this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Karen's downfall was fast, loud, and extremely public. She pled down to probation and community service, the judge noting politely but firmly that HOA bylaws do not outrank federal law. Karen nodded like she understood, which was impressive given she'd spent years believing clipboards were weapons. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following week. Attendance tripled. It was live streamed. Someone brought popcorn. I was asked to speak. My presentation was 3 minutes long and titled Boundaries, Warrants, and Why You Leave Married Men's Cabins Alone. The room applauded. Karen's resignation was immediate. Tearful, she cited stress and misunderstandings and something about being too passionate. The new HOA president implemented a simple policy, open quote, if there's no smoke, no bees, and no bodies, leave it alone, close quote. The real poetry came later. Karen's assigned community service, trail cleanup behind my cabin. Every Tuesday morning, there she was, vest on, grabber in hand, collecting trash along the very path she once surveilled with binoculars. The woman who tried to inspect my composting toilet now emptied other people's garbage. Lena sat on the porch, knitting. The first time Karen saw her, she froze. This is humiliating, Karen muttered to her supervisor. Lena didn't look up. Accountability usually is. Karen never looked at my cabin again. The binoculars disappeared, the emails stopped, and the forest went back to being quiet, the way it always should have been. If this story made you smile, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who's dealt with an HOA nightmare. And tell us where you're watching from. It makes us happy to see how far our stories go.